emotional impact involved. However, what is different in it from the previous two is that it's a tipping point into building tension language. So we're in building tension language right now. We have been in building tension language, and as a good example for the populace of the U.S., I cite the assassination attempt on the Congress person in Arizona. That was clearly a shift out of the release language that a lot of people can identify with. There was the whaling and all of this kind of stuff that as the actual assassination, but we've had building tension language ever since, especially pouring out of the minions. So it's a curious one. I've learned quite a bit about how the release language was propagated and how it continued to go for the 63 days was a series of seemingly unrelated but temporally linked situations, like the earthquakes and the storm and the flooding in Australia contributed to the release language from that part of the population base on the global pop, but at the same time we had the WikiLeaks thing funding all kinds of release language off of other part of global pop. So in the October situation, we have a sharp turn from another long release period, just as we've had here recently, and then we're into building tension in a tipping point fashion. The October thing, if we had to have an analog, would look like the assassination attempt, only it wouldn't be localized to the U.S. Because this is a global pop tipping point in October. I'm not suggesting assassination, but it may well be that this is October is when they attempt to promulgate the idea that we all need to have a third great war to somehow settle things. And it sort of fizzles. That would make sense. But nonetheless, they're going to have their anxiety fest that we all turn on a dime. But then we go into building tension language, so I don't know what that's like. The tipping point of 9/11, we instantly went into release language, and we were held there by television for a number of hours. This tipping point in November went all the way through to January, and it was propelled by the continuing release language from the various events that were going on weather-wise and then with WikiLeaks. So tipping into building tension is going to be very interesting, to say the least. It would be unlike what we've seen so far. The closest we've got of building tension run was the 2008 financial problem, and prior to that was the launch of the Iraq War.
Wow, okay. We've got probably 2 or 3 more questions, Cliff, before
Sure.
we close. Unk, do you have a question from a forum member?
Yes, Cliff, George had mentioned that he and you had put out some kind of a personal marker to see if the stream of events would continue to the point where the juncture in time would show whether or not that looking into the future is altered. Has that point in time occurred, and what was the outcome?
The point in time has occurred. The outcome is ambiguous. We weren't definite enough in the criteria that we laid out, so we think that it's mutable, and we need to repeat the experiment if possible. It was curious the way that all came about anyway, but it relates to whether or not time is ubiquitous. And apparently this guy Anderson with his Time Institute, or whatever it's called, as well as all of the Hindus, as well as all the Chinese who are out mucking about with time stuff, are able to now definitively state that time stuff in universe is not evenly spread around. So thus we now know the speed of light is not constant, and it changes based on certain conditions. So George and I planned an experiment to see if we could basically come up with an idea as to if it was mutable. Was it mutable by design? Could we kick things a certain way by kind of like derailing time, so to speak? And I believe it's possible, but we don't have enough evidence yet as to what it would take. It's starting to form in my mind, though, the amount of energy is required. However, like I say, it was a successful experiment. We reached that point, and we need to do other ones if time permits, which I just don't know if it will. We're about to hit some really nasty periods. We'll get food prices that are rocketing through the roof and all kinds of stressors that may account themselves for the data gap if we get to a situation where that's all people can focus on, or one or two concerns. Then indeed this is something that I've speculated with Igor about. The nature of the data gap is such that it really has him freaked out. He's extremely paranoid anyway, and he has good reason to, having worked for some of the nastier bits of the Air Force. But one of the things we speculated was that a reason for the data gap to exist would be a return to the state where we don't have time for anything other than the bare necessities. In early 1900s, there was this early 1800s, there was the beginning of the industrialization impact on the language of the people in Europe as the Industrial Revolution rolled through, and we saw language start shifting relative to the impact on the lives of people. New words and whole new lexicons came into existence as time became much more regulatory. And we lost a certain level of linguistic capability that went to the idea of basically 3 hours a day to survive. A peasant could, with a well-run farm as a serf, was far better off than a industrial worker ever, and is far better off than a cube-farmed person now. If we were to get to the point where all you could do every day was to stand in line the way they used to in Russia for the few goods that were available to be sold, and that you had to devote an increasingly disproportionate number of hours of your day to getting basic sustenance, then that would create conditions in which the data gap itself would be a naturally expected outcome. And I can't dispute the theory on that, although there's a few bits of evidence that suggest that may not be 100% the cause. But nonetheless, that's kind of what we're looking at the moment, is that something along those lines could exist from this. So the nastiness of the food crises and this kind of thing kind of preclude the idea that George and I will be able to do any of these other experiments. Plus, also, we're already reaching into that period of time where we're starting to show some of the holes that eventually will become the gaps. Bear in mind that it's kind of like Swiss cheese growing, and the holes grow over time to form the gap, and it's not as though all of a sudden we just hit a big wall and there's the gap. It creeps in on us.
Okay, Clif. Well, Clif, as we end this discussion, I wanted to ask two more final questions before you go. Are you planning on releasing another report in the future?
Yes.
Any time frame possible? Yep.
No, because I haven't. It's very grueling. I've got to take care of some extra report work in the sense that we've got to do some more experiments on propagation. That's how we actually track how far the filter how much we have to filter. In the last couple of propagation studies haven't worked out very well for us because they've been propagating too far. So, for instance, I used to use Igor would come to me and say, okay, we've got, this filter is bogging down, and this particular part of the database is not being populated the way it should. And so I'd have to go in and I'd tweak the software, and in order to tweak it effectively, we would do propagation studies. Some of those were done at some forums that we're not using anymore, and we have to find new forums, and in order to do a propagation study off of them, we have to do an analysis. So I'm at least, I want to say 30, 60 days out before even turning the spiders on for anything other than filter tuning. And from then, we could then project as to how far out we might be for another report. And it may be moot by the time we reach April and May. A lot of us just simply may not care anymore.
True. Finally, we wanted to close with a hopeful question for our members. There will be incredible tests over these next few years, and no doubt, lots of doom and gloom. But you mentioned hopeful things in our future. New electrics, calorie-based economy, contribution society, rise of the no-scene teachers. You also talk about monuments being built for the epic times we're going to live through. Please tell us, as a final thought, what the webbots and you believe will happen in the period after this in the 2020 realm.
Well, it's really curious. The new electrics showed up way back when. I mean, they're one of the main evidentiary supports or benefits rather for your postulate. The longer we see something, the more impact it's going to have. And even now we're seeing the breakout of the new electrics language, and it's going to just roll over the whole planet and change everything, I think, the same way that it'll probably be on the scale of the cell phone in its impact on the global society, but in terms of how it's spread, but the impact will be of the order of electrification of a nation. So, because America, however, how much we may have desired or tried to be empire, we weren't really anything until we electrified the whole nation. And from that point on, we had such a huge gain over the rest of the planet that even Buckminster Fuller said that if we wanted to change the nature of our species, all we had to do would be to run a single electrical grid around all the coastlines and bring electricity to everybody, and then a entirely new species would be created from that. And I suspect that we could achieve our own transition from the kind of civilization now to a Type 1 civilization just by doing that. So the new electrics, the emotional impact can't be underestimated. It's going to radically alter everything that we've got now. The problem will be the discontinuity for us from the data from now until the early 2020s. But it's very curious. I expected personally that the long-term data, because a lot of it references legal language and other carry values that have long-term impact, I expected a lot of it to be very negative, and it does not appear to be that way. It appears that we have some very big hurdles to overcome, and that at least some portion of the population will be successful, and humanity will be able to start redefining itself. And that redefinition, we're living in those times right now. So that's really cool. It's going to be kind of gnarly over the next few years, but we can adapt and improvise and go on and thrive.
True, yeah, definitely a rebirth. Thank you very much, Cliff. It's been a pleasure. I hope it's been enjoyable for you, as it has been for us. If not, bad luck, mate.
Yeah, it's kind of screwed now. Yeah. No. This has been good. I'm just really beat. I wish I could have thought better. It's been a long day. No problem.
No, definitely. You've been an inspiration to many. There is a famous saying that goes like this: small people talk about other people. Average people talk about current events. Great people talk about ideas. I'd like to add one more saying: wise people inspire ideas. I think many people on the forum and around the world will agree that your legacy is not only the forecasts you make, but the ideas that you've inspired in all of us. Hopefully we can do this again someday before the internet goes away. But for tonight, on behalf of Fox and all the members of the WebBot Forum, we thank you for your time and, more importantly, for listening to Universe. May you, Kathy, Igor, have many pies to come. Namaste.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Cliff.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, Cliff. Thank you.
Bye.
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 Good night.
Bye. Thank you.
Pie's out.
Good night, John Boy.
There we go. Yeah, I'm gonna head to bed. It's 2 hours.
All right.
Okay, that's it, guys.